We are in Job, and we are about to begin chapter 16. Eliphaz just ended a speech to Job, and part of what he says there is, "What is man that he could be pure, and he who is born of a woman that he could be righteous? If God puts no trust in his saints, and the heavens are not pure in his sight, how much less a man who is abominable and filthy, who drinks iniquity like water?" And so, what Eliphaz just did is he told Job, if the best of mankind is abominable before God, then how bad are you, Job? That's what he's telling him. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for your loving kindness. We thank you for this time you have given us to look into this book, to gain a better understanding of our relationship with you. Be with us, that we'll put aside the cares of the world, that we'll commit ourselves to serving you, and as Job did, uh, serve you no matter what we face. We pray that you would be with all the classes and all the teachers today, that your name might be honored and uplifted through Christ. Amen. All right, so I'm not going to repeat everything that we've covered so far, but obviously Job has undergone a great adversity in his life, and he's challenged, he's struggling to understand it, and we see that he started to, and probably because of the accusations of his so-called friends, he started to become more bold in some of his assertions, and some of the things that he has said are that I'm innocent, and if you'll just look around, all men go through tough times, and right now it's just my time. That didn't work, and so they kept pressing him. And so he says, it's not always the case that the righteous always does well. It's not always the case that the wicked is not allowed to prosper. Robbers sometimes do prosper. They still aren't listening. Job is getting frustrated, and he's saying, oh, you're just not hearing me. I wish God were here that he could clarify the matter for us all. And if he were, then that would just set things right. That would set in order what the truth is about the matter. But unfortunately, I can't just call God as a witness here. He's not going to appear at my bidding. And he starts to complain a little about that. That that I don't have a fair relationship here with God. Because we're not on equal playing field, and that's true actually. I mean, certainly it is, right? God's not on our level, and so, but Job's feeling like, if he would just be here for me, and he's kind of abandoned me now. Job admits, like his friends does, that this is from God. Everybody can see, even the animals of the earth can see that this is from God. But the reason this is happening is not the same thing that you, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar must be suggesting. And he goes on to maybe ask the question or suggest that if this is how it is, that's just not fair. What point is there in being righteous if the righteous have to endure this, if there's not a reward for righteousness? And so, again, he's probably overstating his case maybe there. Because he's feeling like even though what Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, what their applications might be, that those are wrong, nevertheless, what they're saying is really how it ought to be, that God rewards the righteous and he punishes the wicked. So, and then he turns in chapter 13 to God, as far as maybe a prayer, or at least his speech turns to God. And he's wanting to know, he's already done this before, he wants to know, what have I done to you, O watcher of men? But in chapter 13, he wants to know in verse 23, what is my sin? Show me my sin. If what these guys are saying is true, then God, show me what I've done wrong. Name my sin. And Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, of course, are listening to this. And when we get to the end of lesson 3 that covers chapters 16 through 22, we're going to see that Eliphaz takes it upon himself to very specifically start naming out what Job's sins are. And like it seems like Eliphaz does, in other cases perhaps, he's obviously making stuff up. But he starts naming sins based upon what must be the case, based upon how bad Job's calamity is. All right, so chapter 16, it says, "Then Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall words of wind have an end?" He's already got onto them a time or two about, you're not really being my friends here. And in chapter 16, he's really going to hammer them on this, that you're not doing what's best for me. You're not even trying to help me. You're just here to go after me, and for no good reason, because you think you know everything. You haven't listened to what I've said with regard to the fact that, yes, sometimes robbers do prosper. They haven't even listened to that. In fact, their answers, they keep going back to the exact same thing without considering anything else. And so he's frustrated here. I've heard many such things. You are horrible comforters. You've come to try to comfort me. Well, you're not doing such a good job. He even told them several chapters ago that even if I were at fault, you should have done a better job than this. That even if I were unrighteous and committing acts of unrighteousness, you should have come across a little bit different and tried to help your friend, maybe as one who understands that they have frailties and they have sins too. And so let's just touch on that for a second in these first two questions under lesson 3. So, have you seen the progression of how Job's attitude is changing somewhat? I mean, he's still wanting to do what's right, but he's getting frustrated with his friends here. Chapter 1 and verse 22, it says that Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Chapter 2 and verse 10 says that, when his wife says you should just curse God and die, he says, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God? And shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. And then you get to chapter 3 and verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And then he goes on, of course, to just wish he were never born, wish he had died at birth, and so forth. Then you get to chapter 6 and verse 4. For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. My spirit drinks in their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. All right, so God's done this to me. There's an admission all along that this is from God, but it must not be for the reason that you guys think. And we've discussed that before. Is it truly from God? And that's kind of a yes or no, sort of, but not directly maybe. All right, we get to verses 8 and 9 of 6, and it says, "Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the thing that I long for, that it would please God to crush me, that he would loose his hand and cut me off. God, I wish you would just let me die." All right, verses 20 and 21 of chapter 7. "Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be." So he's wrestling with, why won't you take action, Lord? Why do you keep attacking me and causing me this pain? Why won't you just let me die and be at peace finally? All right, chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. I understand man can't be righteous before God because his friends keep telling him that you've got to commit yourself to God, you've got to be righteous before God, but you're not doing so. Man can't be that, and he admits that. He agrees with them. But as chapter 9 goes on, of course, that's where he starts thinking that, this is just not a fair relationship, because my witness, God, who could set the record straight, he's not available for me. And in fact, later on in chapter 9, he's too busy crushing me to come be my witness. He's too busy wounding me without cause. Verses 17 and verse 18. He won't even allow me to catch my breath. And so how can he be my witness when he keeps, going after me like this? All right, so chapter 9 and verse 29, if I am condemned, why then do I labor in vain? What's the point of being righteous if this is the result you get from being righteous? So he's wrestling with the whys and the fairness of it all. All right, you get to chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. My soul loathes life, and I'm going to complain. All right. I will speak in bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Show me what you contend with me. Does it seem good to you that you should oppress, that you should despise the work of your hands and smile on the counsel of the wicked? All right, so again, sounds like he feels like this is not fair. And I wish I had the opportunity to talk to you. Now, there's an old saying, be careful what you wish for, right? Why is that? You might get it. Does he get his opportunity to talk to God? He sure does. And he can't say anything. So all of man's best laid plans, this is what I would do if I got the chance to talk to God. And I would know the answers and I'd be ready. Yeah, not so much. Okay, chapter 10 and verse 20. Are not my days few? Cease. Leave me alone that I may take a little comfort. Chapter 12 and verse 6. The tents of robbers prosper, and those who provoke God are secure in what God provides by his hand. Now, this is mostly an argument back to his friends, but there's probably a little bit of sense of this is just not fair because the tents of robbers do sometimes prosper. 10 verse 20, he deprives the trusted ones of speech and takes away the discernment of the elders. Chapter 12 and verse 6. Let's go to 13 verse 15. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Even so, I will defend my own ways before him. So he's wrestling with this relationship with God, isn't he? So when we look at the theme of the speeches of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, use their example and then relate that to God's instructions to fathers in Ephesians 6 and verse 4. So what does God tell fathers through Paul in Ephesians? Provoke not your children to wrath. All right. Is there a correlation with what's going on here with Job? I know these aren't his fathers. How do you provoke your children to wrath? How can you do that? Being unfair is a very good answer, I believe, because that's exactly what these guys are doing to Job. They're not listening, are they? They're not understanding they're not even understanding probably the entirety of their own experiences. Surely, if they would look back and think objectively on this, they would realize and remember that sometimes robbers do in fact prosper. Sometimes the good have bad things that happen to them. And so parents have to be very careful with their children then. And fathers in particular in Ephesians are given this directive that you've got to raise them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, but you got to do so without causing the anger and the whatever you want to say here. That you've got to be fair. You've got to administer the righteousness of God to them and live that and show the consistency in doing all that. And these men are not being consistent. They're not being fair. They're not hearing out Job's side of the story. They're not even considering probably what is their own life experiences if they would just sit back and do that. They're so intent on this is the answer and I'm not going to listen to anything else other than that answer. Okay, when we look at the first, let's go ahead and read 16, 4, and 5. Job's already said, you're miserable friends. You've done a horrible job of comforting. And if I were in your situation, I also could speak as you do, he says in verse 4. If your soul were in my soul's place, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you, but I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the comfort of my lips would relieve your grief. And so there's the answer to number one under chapter 16 and 17. He has accused his friends of being horrible comforters. And will your empty words ever cease? Are you ever going to stop and listen a little bit? And if I were in your place, what would I do? Sometimes that's easy to say, but I'd do a better job than this. I'd try to help you. All right, somebody want to read verses, how about just 6 through 17? Okay, please.
Though I speak, my grief is not relieved. And if I remain silent, how am I ease? But now he has torn me out. You have made desolate all my company. You have shriveled me up. It is a witness against me. My leanness rises up against me and bears witness to my face. Tears me in his wrath, hates me. He gnashes at me with his teeth. My adversary sharpens his gaze on me. They gape at me with their mouth. They strike me reproachfully on the cheek. They gather together against me. God has delivered me to the ungodly and turned me over to the hands of the wicked. I was at ease, but he has shattered me. He also has taken me by my neck and shaken me to pieces. He has set me up for his target. His archers surround me. He pierces my heart and does not pity. He pours out my gall on the ground. He breaks me with wound upon wound. He runs at me like a warrior. I have sewn sackcloth over my skin and laid my head in dust. My face is flushed from weeping, and on my eyelids is the shadow of death. Although no violence is in my hands, my prayer is pure.
All right, so who's he addressing here? I'll stop talking for a minute and let you have to actually think about it and answer. Yeah, he's addressing his friends, and yet at the same time, who's he referencing as he addresses his friends? He's talking about God and the friends. Now, God has turned himself against Job, is his conclusion here. And sometimes he'll use and it becomes obvious that he's talking about that this is God. You've shriveled me up, and it's a witness against me, my leanness. There's a chance, I suppose, some of this could be Eliphaz specifically. But in verse 11, God has delivered me to the ungodly and turned me over to the hands of the wicked. All right, so who's the ungodly and the wicked here then? Maybe it's flowery, poetic terms to say, just in general, I've been abandoned in my righteousness and I've been turned over to the wicked. And yet, I get the feeling that he has a direct audio, or the arrow's pointing toward his friends here, that they're his enemies now. They're the ones who have their mouths agape, ready to bite him and do whatever they can to cause harm to him. And so his adversaries now have become his enemies because they won't give him a chance to be at peace. They keep grilling him and accusing him. And so, what are all the things throughout these verses that God says Job has done to him? In verses 6 through 14 in particular. And he's either done it directly or he's done it through the friends. Yeah, I'm worn out. He's worn me out. What else?
I mean, a lot of the language he uses is very like visceral. Like he's cut me and he's gnashed at me and he's torn me up, and Really just kind of going with that imagery.
Yeah, I'm shriveled up. My leanness rises up against me. He tears at me in his wrath. I'm hated. I'm gnashed at. He gnashes at me with his teeth at the enemy. God has delivered me, verse 11, back to that, to the ungodly, turn me over to the hands of the wicked. I'm shattered. It's like somebody's taken me by the neck and shaking me. That's how I feel that God has done to me through my so-called friends. Yeah, Jack.
What's this language of betrayal in his, and what that I get from what he says here? There's this idea that, I was in a place of safety and comfort, and he's taken me and he's completely given me up to evil, right? He's given me up to my enemies. He's turned himself against me and abandoned me and now left me to I think Job is feeling this idea of like, I've been betrayed almost, or I've been given up by God.
Yeah. Breaks me with verse 14, wound upon wound. And so that imagery is, I can't even let one wound heal until, I've just pounded. Doug, did you? Jennifer, yes.
I was just thinking this picture of all the tearing him and gnashing at him with the teeth. It reminds me of how Jesus felt, and that we see in Psalm 22, verse 16, when he was talking about dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me. And there is a sense in which when people turn against you, it is like wild animals. That's what they're acting like, and I think he's feeling that as well.
Yeah, there's certainly the language connections with what Jesus had to endure. And so we certainly learn lessons by those comparisons, I believe, that the Bible uses this kind of language in different places. And nobody is applying any sense to the situation here, it seems like. They're too busy. It's almost like a wild dog that's gone mad that just, and they can't sit back and think about anything that's rational. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm always wondering, as I read Job, I guess it's for the whole class, not even just specifically for you, but is this too bold for us to be saying? Is this too bold for us to be explaining how we're feeling like this? Is this too far down the line, or is Job still speaking as somebody who's a follower of God here? I never know really where the line is in this book.
Yeah, and that you'll see in the lesson sheets, I keep asking this question and even saying that maybe at this point we could argue that Job's not crossed the line, but you can see the direction things are heading in. And so it is difficult in this book. Certainly when you get to the end, you see Job repents. God expected repentance. And so somewhere along the way, although Job is righteous overall, his reaction to his friends has led him to overstate his case and say things maybe that he wouldn't have otherwise said. And so that's what we're trying to help figure out here is, when does he cross the line? But you do see that he's complaining about the fairness of it all at this point. And remember, when God speaks, God does not answer his questions that he wants answered all along. Why is this? God basically says, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't have any idea how things are run, so how dare you try to suggest that I need to improve the way things are being run in the universe. And so I don't know that it really answers your question, but Louise is about to do that. So
God knows all. The Holy Spirit knows what we need before we say it. So there's not any secrets. I think where the issue may come is when you do it publicly. Question God, question his wisdom, question what he's doing. But I think privately we can go to God with anything. He already knows. He knows our heart and what our needs are. So I think we can always go to God and question or ask for help or whatever it is, because he already knows what we're thinking. He's got the answers.
That's right.
It's not a secret.
If we are able to train our mind, some of the things Ethan said last week in his lesson, that when we train our minds to have our thought process what God thinks, and that's by studying His Word and understanding the character and nature of God, then things are going to be well, because we're not going to be disappointed, because we know that God's giving us the answers that we should expect to get or to get. And so that's all part of the process here, I believe, is that we got to train our minds to think the way God wants us to think, and that's part of what we're trying to do with this study. But you're right, God knows what's going on in Job's mind here, and Job doesn't have to say it, but Job does need to think differently and maybe more maturely, as it turns out. Yeah.
I guess to give a little more context, I try to reconcile that with Hebrews 4:16, where it's talking about coming boldly before the throne of grace. And I know that it's important to talk to the Father in a pretty raw way. And so I guess that I was trying to figure out, is this too much? Is this like the point where my thoughts should be a little bit more humble, or is this still just what the Lord is expecting? So I know that we're still trying to figure out that as we're going through the class, but that's kind of like the question I have.
I'm glad you brought up Hebrews. We can boldly come before the throne. What does that mean? And I'm convinced it's a mistake for us to think I can boldly come before the throne means I can come bebopping in like I'm an heir and I get to complain the way bratty kids sometimes today complain to their parents when you see them on sitcoms. That's not what's being portrayed there at all in Hebrews. We can boldly come before the throne of God, so God's the king, and we can boldly come in the sense that we can come without fear that we're going to be destroyed. Remember when Esther went before the king? She had no idea what his response was going to be, because he had not called her. And so she went before the throne not knowing for sure what's going to happen, but she felt convicted, and Mordecai certainly seems to have helped her in that. And so she was not able to boldly come before the throne with a confident expectation that everything's going to be okay. We can do that with what Jesus has done for us. But that doesn't mean we come in a haughty manner or a way that we feel like we own the place. We're still before our God Almighty, the Father. And so when we fully appreciate the relationship that a devoted son or daughter has to the Father, the King, then there's always the respect that you come for it. And there's where some Job's kind of crossing the line, I believe.
I think Job was wrong in verse 11. It says, God delivered me to the ungodly, turned me over to the hands of the wicked. Those are both very active things that Job is saying God did. God caused this, when in fact he allowed it. And it's a huge difference.
Well,
I hear what you're saying, and yet I'm going to say there's a sense in which God, when he does allow it, he causes it.
Because God, again, I'm going to go back to the
very beginning when he says, you have incited me against him.
And so
the sin isn't necessarily saying God has done this. The sin is questioning and demanding of God that I need answers, because
this is not fair. This is not the way things ought to be run. When you see God's condemnation of Job, that's what that content is all about. That you haven't been doing things correctly. How dare you say that, Job? Because you don't even know the simplest of things when it comes to the creation. And so I understand where you're coming from, and yes, that seems like it crosses the line at times, because certainly God's not the one who directly did this. But in the sense that he allowed it, God himself says, you've incited me against him. So when we get to the end, God doesn't defend himself that way by saying, wait a minute, Job, you don't even know what was going on here. Satan came before me. He doesn't have to, because it doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. Okay. Where are we now? Let's see. We went through verse 17. Job in verse 17 maintains his innocence, though. You see that? No violence is in my hands, and my prayer is pure. Surely now, in verse 19, we haven't read that yet, but now my witness is in heaven, and my evidence is on high. And what he's saying there is God knows this to be true. I'm innocent, and God knows it to be true. All right, O earth, do not cover my blood, and let my cry have no resting place. Surely even now my witness is in heaven, and my evidence is on high. My friends scorn me, my eyes pour out tears to God. Oh, that one might plead for a man with God, as a man pleads for his neighbor. For when a few years are finished, I shall go the way of no return. I wish I had somebody on my side who would help me out here and help God to listen and give me the relief that I'm seeking. Let me read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 17. My spirit is broken, my days are extinguished, the grave is ready for me. Are not mockers with me, and does not my eye dwell on their provocation? And so he's explained in the last chapter roughly that he's worn out, he's tired, that he's shriveled up, he's lean, his face is flushed from weeping, the shadow of death is on his eyelids. And my spirit's broken, he says in chapter 17. And I'm just ready to die, and yet I'm here with the mockers. He's obviously hurt by what his friends have done here, isn't he? Somebody want to read 3 through 9? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Lay down a pledge for me with you. Who is there who will put up security for me? Since you have closed their hearts to understanding, therefore you will not let them try. He who informs against his friends to get a share of their property, the eyes of his children will fail. He has made me a byword of the peoples, and I am one before whom men spit. My eye has grown dim from vexation, and all my members are like a shadow. The upright are appalled at this. The innocent stirs himself up against the godless. Yet the righteous holds to his way, and he who has clean hands grows stronger and stronger.
All right, so how would you describe these few verses here? What's Job saying? Sort of a continuation of what he's just said, isn't it? Of who's going to be here to take a pledge with, who's going to help me get through this since I can't seem to get God to come down and help me out? Who's going to do that? Instead, I'm in this predicament where I have no way out. Other thoughts?
I think where he ends off in verse 9 is, right, I know I'm right, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And he kind of seems to have this idea that, eventually the truth will out, and my hands will go stronger and stronger, right? Because I'm really blameless in this. I'm upright.
And later on, we're going to see, I hate to sometimes get ahead of the game here, but I think it helps set the context a little better for some of the things Job is saying along the way. But later on, Elihu is going to tell Job this. He's going to give him some advice based upon self-righteousness. And God, when God speaks, is also going to speak to the same thing and say, would you annul my judgments, basically so that you can prove yourself to be right? And so somehow through this, what Job is doing, one of the things that where he stepped over the line, is that I'm right and I know that, and therefore God must be not running things properly. That's in essence what Job is saying in some of his arguments here. And God takes him to task on that later on. That would you annul my judgments so that you can be, you can display this self-righteousness. So yes, while Job was righteous, and that's the overall premise, when we see that clearly, God calls him righteous himself, that his response to all of the events and to his provocation, the friend's provocation, he steps over the line and he asserts the fact that I know I'm right, and so the issue must be with God, maybe, that things just aren't fair. Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, I'm gonna think of like Kristen Tristan just asked, and for me, so often where I see the problem with Job is, he understands he's righteous, but and that he has done nothing specifically wrong that he can point to, right? And his problem is that he is deciding in his mind what he deserves because of that. That, well, I'm blameless, I don't deserve this, right? And I'm upright, so really God should do this for me. And that's I think when we talk about like how far is too far, it's when instead of telling God our feelings and going to God with what we're going through and our struggles, when we decide that, well, God, I'm feeling this way, so you should do this. God, this is what's going on in my life. You need to do this.
Yeah, like we've decided we know how it ought to be.
We've decided that because I'm feeling this way, thus, instead of just going to God with our struggles.
And I'm of the mind that he, along the way here has probably overstated his case. When you get to chapter 23, to me, chapter 23 is kind of the climax of when Job is just, you can almost see him blowing the lid off in his own mind. You can almost, again, I picture it this way. I don't know for sure how his reaction was after Eliphaz starts making the specific accusations, but it's almost an I had it moment. And at that point, when we've had it, that's when we're very in a lot of danger of sinning, because we start blurting out things that we would never say otherwise. And Job, I believe in chapter 23 does that. Yeah, please.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, is we can go to God with any request, any need, any want, any desire. That's not necessarily what we need. And if we look at what Jesus did, he said, "Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And that's where we have to end it. We have to end it with and put it in his hands, because he knows what we need.
So when Jesus tells his disciples, "Seek and you shall find," and makes the reference to, if a son asks for something to eat, is the father going to give him a scorpion or whatever? And obviously the answer is no to that. But, sometimes our parents do give us some spinach to eat along the way too, whether we like, we got to have some things that are good for us along the way, and we can't just eat donuts and ice cream all the time. So even if we ask for it, we get something different. And that's what God does with us too. Okay, chapter 17, continuing on. Let's see, we read through verse 9. Let's see if we've missed any questions here. He describes this, well, we'll finish those in just a minute. But please, verse 10, come back again, all of you, for I shall not find one wise man among you. My days are past, my purposes are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart. They change the night into day, the light is near, they say, in the face of darkness. If I wait for the grave as my house, if I make my bed in the darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, you are my mother and my sister, where then is my hope? As for my hope, who can see it? Will they go down to the gates of Sheol? Shall we have rest together in the dust? My final hope right now, Job is saying, is when this is all over and I die, right now that's where my hope is, that God's going to just relieve me of my anguish that I'm in. Number 5, how does Job describe his friends in chapter 17? So there's several ways that he's done that. What are some of those?
Calls them mockers.
Yeah, they're mockers. Yeah, God, they're foolish. God's hidden their heart from understanding. There's not one wise man among you, verse 10. I mean, you're just foolish. You're not even thinking about what the facts are here. Maybe even there's an allusion to them being hypocrites, when you look at verses 6 through 9.
He kind of, in the backhanded way, calls them not upright or not righteous. He says, if you were upright, you would have been astonished, but you're not astonished, so you must not be upright.
Yep. So Job is having, obviously his friends have not treated him the way he thinks he ought to be treated, and in fact they haven't. And so he's wrestling with a lot of things right now. He's down and he's being kicked while he is down. All right, we get to chapter 18 and Bildad. We got 5 minutes for Bildad here. And we can pick up with him next time. But somebody want to read all of chapter 18? It's 21 verses, a little longer, but Tristan volunteers again. Okay, go ahead, please.
Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, How long till you put an end to words, gain understanding, and afterwards we will speak? Why are we counted as beasts, regarded as stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in anger, shall the earth be forsaken for you? Or shall the rock be removed from its place? The light of the wicked indeed goes out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. The light is dark in his tent, his lamp beside him is put out. The steps of his strength are shortened, and his own counsel cast him down. For he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walks into a snare. The net takes him by the heel, and a snare lays hold of him. A noose is hidden for him on the ground. They trap for him in the road. Terrors frighten him on every side and drive him to his feet. His strength is starved, and destruction is ready at his side. It devours patches of his skin. The firstborn of death devours his limbs. He is uprooted from the shelter of his tent, and they parade him before the king of terrors. They dwell in his tent who are none of his. Brimstone is scattered on his dwelling. His roots are dried out below, and his branch withers above. The memory of him perishes from the earth, he who has no name among the renowned. He is driven from light into darkness and chased out of the world. He has neither son nor posterity among his people, nor any remaining in his dwellings. Those in the west are astonished at his day, as those in the east are frightened. Surely such are the dwellings of the wicked. This is the place of him who does not know God.
So have you ever looked at some of the old debates that have taken place either among brethren or maybe with brethren and somebody in a denominational church? And oftentimes what happens in these debates is at some point it becomes personal. And the arguments are based upon a personal insult more so than getting onto the facts of the matter or doing what's right with God and having that relationship. And it almost seems like that's what Bildad starts out with here is he is aggravated because he feels like this has become personal and you're just not listening to me, Job, and that's a personal insult to him. And that never goes in a good direction when you're not trying to use how can I serve God and follow God as the basis, but instead now we're arguing based upon personal insults. That's what Bildad seems like he's doing right now. How long will you keep up this nonsense of yours, Job? If you'll gain understanding, then we'll speak and maybe you'll actually listen to us. So gain some understanding, Job, because we can't, you're just spouting off a bunch of nonsense. You're not listening to us. Shall all that we know be changed just so that you can, what you say is right? Just because you say it isn't so, does that mean everything in life has changed? Now again, he's wrong here because Job has actually shown more truthfulness about how life is sometimes than they have. But nevertheless, he's not listening here. He's insulted, and now Job, he just lets him have it. The rest of this chapter, verses 5 through 21, then, is his discourse on the wicked. And it's the same old speech you see over and over again here, that the wicked are punished and the righteous would otherwise, the understanding is, be rewarded. Everything he says, verses 5 through 21, is a way to state that the wicked are punished. We know this. Just because you say it isn't so doesn't mean that's true, Job. And so he elaborates just to drive this point home and then beat him over the head with a hammer with it after he drives it home. All right, that brings us through chapter 18, and we are out of time. But any comments on chapter 16, 17, and 18 that we haven't talked about so far? Yeah, Dennis.
What you said, what you just said about, sometimes there's debates and it winds up turning personal. And you get, I don't know how to say it other than just like a feeling when you read through what Bildad says in chapter 18. Like some of the words he says It's like there's an echo of the things that really happened to Job, like in chapter 1 and 2 almost. And it's like, do I need to remind you, like you've experienced these very things and that proves you're wicked, you know? And he's not like saying the word out loud, but it's almost, do you remember how all your kids got killed? You're obviously wicked, you know, but there's some of that language even here where it's like he's just digging the knife in more to get his point there.
Yeah, the language is more and more elevated, and the temperatures are higher now than they have been before. And so again, I've told you that I believe chapter 23, in my mind, is probably the climax, or when Job just kind of snaps for a while. And you can see why it's happening the way that they approach it. All right, well, thank you for your help today.